And so now we have 3 scientists working almost full-time in a lab here in the United States with the major goal for us to produce a human embryo by human cloning.
If you followed the news about 20 years ago, you might remember the name Clonaid in the headlines. Details about this controversial startup have gotten muddied over time, but what we know is that they claim to have been pioneers in human cloning. There was quite a hullabaloo over the ethics of such practices when this came to light, which even today overshadows the full history and beliefs of Clonaid's founders. As such, the entirety of this anomaly remains a mostly obscure story in the mainstream media. Now, we're going to do a deep dive into the origins of Clonaid, what challenges it was met with, and where its founders are today. In December of 1973, a sports car journalist named Claude Maurice Marcel Rael had begun exploring the Puy de l'Azoulas, a volcanic crater in France. Here, he says he made first contact with an alien race called the Elohim. This name has its origins in ancient Hebrew, meaning those of the sky. Just like George Van Tassel, who we covered in our Ashtar Charan video, Mr. Rael was bedazzled by whatever encounter he had. UFO sightings were a more recent phenomenon in France, hitting their peak in the mid-70s. Mr. Rael immediately changed his name to one he says the Elohim gave to him, Rael. This was the first of a few meetings with the Elohim, or so claims Rael. He recounts he was tasked with the role as emissary of the Elohim to all of mankind, and that mulling over this responsibility for several months gave him stomach problems. Nevertheless, Rael took a leap of faith and quit the sports car magazine to begin developing his theories based on what the aliens had said to him. The result was a synthesis of Christianity and New Age scientific beliefs, most notably stating that the Earth was seeded with life by advanced aliens long ago. In short, Rael believed that ancient DNA was altered to redirect human evolution to a form resembling the Elohim. Many historic holy men and prophets were said to have been Elohim messengers, but their teachings were warped over time. Now it was Rael's job to correct the mistakes, and begin to help humanity welcome alien visitors. Roughly a year later, he was giving public lectures about his newfound beliefs. Thousands poured into whatever venue Rael was at just to hear him speak. His teachings praised the advancements made by Elohim society, like their eradication of poverty and war. As he gained popularity, he created an organization named Mouvement pour l'accueil des Elohim Critères de l'Humanité, or simply MADIC. Rael had about 170 followers by the end of 1974. Typically, the organization attracted those involved with pseudoscience and the occult. In December, MADIC members gathered at the first point of contact between Rael and the Elohim, Puy de l'Azoulas. It was here that he received the first investments to be put towards a book recounting what he preached. But despite his early successes, Rael remained unsatisfied with the course MADIC was heading in. There was little formal structure, and Rael felt he was being pushed out of his own creation. Believing an insurrection was imminent, he expelled those who challenged his direction in one fell swoop. Now free to reorganize as he wished, Rael looked to the hierarchy of the church to structure his leadership. This included anointing bishops and establishing elaborate rituals. Rael says he was visited by the Elohim once more in late 1976, but this time he was apparently ushered to their homeworld. Books he wrote after that detail elements of their culture that would soon define his beliefs, including copious amounts of casual sex, development of psychic powers, and most importantly, cloning technology. When he returned to his followers, he declared a new name for his community, Realism. He codified the new religion's beliefs around a mixture of fringe science and creationism, injecting the Elohim as central guides to the faith. Rael created a Council of the Wise which maintained consistency within the ranks. There was also a compulsory $100 annual fee. Members would attend Rael's seminars, which were based around his practice of sensual meditation. This involved a guided mental travel in a low-lit room, with participants eventually envisioning themselves on the Elohim homeworld. Clothing was optional. Rael made it the faith's mission to improve the human condition to the point of joining the Elohim. Part of this involved promoting free love for free love's sake, as he felt advantages in gene splicing would make sex for procreation obsolete. He was known in these days as an open-minded leader who encouraged his male followers to be more effeminate. Around 1977, he began professing his belief in a geniocracy, where political leaders would have to meet a minimum intelligence threshold to be in office. Voters, though held to a lesser standard, still had to meet a certain IQ. Rael's international profile would expand considerably by the 1980s. He translated his texts into countless languages, disseminating them throughout Asia and Africa. They became especially popular in South Korea and Japan. Rael trotted the globe, once publicly declaring himself the true pope while visiting the Vatican in 1986. In 1992, a property was bought outside of Valcourt, Quebec as a new retreat center. Rael christened it Les Jardins du Prophète. This coincided with a French doctor named Brigitte Boisselier joining the Rael sect. Dr. Boisselier, purportedly a holder of 2 PhDs, described Realism as a most scientifically rooted religion that caught her attention. SMH reported that she had been living in the United States since the 1980s, though it notes most of what's known about Dr. Boisselier was provided by herself years later. She rose through the ranks quickly, with Rael himself taking notice of her due to her scientific background. Her belief was that Realism was a means of helping people, especially through its promotion of genetic research. But her involvement took a toll on other aspects of her life, namely her marriage. Dr. Boisselier and her husband divorced sometime in the mid-1990s. Early in 1997, the Raelians were advocating for human cloning. They believed it was a key step in the path to immortality. Rael pushed the possibilities it provided to same-sex couples for having children, indicative of his progressive sexual attitudes for the time. Part of this was in direct opposition to Pope John Paul II's disapproval of cloning. Rael was also incensed by a decision President Clinton made to expand on a 1994 ruling prohibiting the use of federal funding in human embryo experiments, which now included any experiments to clone human beings. But there was nothing prohibiting private firms from exploring the possibility of cloning, which Rael keenly took note of. The success of Dolly's birth took the world by storm. Many people wondered how long it would be before a human could be cloned, though most scientists condemned the idea based on their ethics. Raelians, of course, were not of this mindset. If anything, it served as an inspiration. Shortly after news of Dolly's birth hit the media, Rael made an announcement that he had found investors to back research into human cloning. Realism was boasting over 35,000 members by 1997, based on their estimates. That February, Rael began funding a Bahama-based company dubbed Valiant Venture Limited. Its main product was Clonaid, a project to unlock the secret of human cloning. Another service was called InsuraClone, allowing for genetic scraping to preserve the cells of a loved one in the case of illness or accident. The company didn't hide that their ultimate goal was finding the key to immortality. In fact, Rael had this to say, quote, "The next step, like the Elohim do with their 25,000 years of scientific advance, will be to directly clone an adult person without having to go through the growth process and to transfer memory and personality in this person. Then we wake up after death in a brand new body just like after a good night's sleep." The company noted the need to find a country where human cloning was legal, and that it would be marketed to a wealthy demographic. Costs started at $200,000. Initially, Dr. Boisselier was given but a passing reference on the website. Her advocacy was apparent in this quote, "Parents have the right to decide to have a baby who will bear the genetic code of one of them. It's now common to see the dead parent father a baby through the process of frozen sperm implantation. Imagine the joy of a widow raising a child looking like her beloved deceased husband." A press interview with the French publication Le Monde featured Dr. Boisselier praising efforts to clone humans. Here she described herself as the director of Clonaid. Less than a month later, the article had cost her a high-ranking position at Air Liquide. Supposedly, her career was being compromised by her personal life. She won a religious discrimination lawsuit while at the same time losing a custody battle over her youngest daughter. Feeling that the French public was intolerant to her beliefs, Dr. Boisselier emigrated to Quebec. Shortly after, she was anointed a Raelian bishop. Rael established his Order of Angels in 1998. They were an all-female troop of believers who were prepared to meet the Elohim. Some conditions for being an angel included a beautiful appearance and a willingness to only have relations with the aliens and Raelian prophets, such as Rael himself. The Bahamian government froze the bank accounts of Clonaid, which Rael blamed on mounting pressure from French journalists. But he also maintained this was simply the location of the company mailbox. In reality, this pushed the Clonaid plan back a couple of years. In 2000, Rael arranged a press conference debuting 8 of the angels who had volunteered as surrogate mothers for clones. There were scores of non-angels also present as prospects. This included Dr. Boisselier's oldest daughter, Marina. The religion saw a huge boost in popularity. Of the dangers in cloning, one volunteer said, quote, "The surrogate mother will be followed more than any other pregnant woman on Earth. If there is any problem, there will be an abortion at an early stage, so there is nothing to fear." Rael admitted that Clonaid had been relegated to mostly consulting for the last few years, but also revealed that they were now ready to take the first steps towards real cloning. He raved about the connection between his religion and science, and scoffed at rumors that it was a suicide cult. Quote, "People often ask if the Raelians are a dangerous or suicidal group, but why would we be suicidal if our goal is to clone and live forever?" At the same time, Dr. Boisselier took a teaching job at Hamilton College, where she claimed to be a popular lecturer. In August, Rael's website was discovered by a prospective backer. This wealthy investor would help with the establishment of a secret laboratory, on the condition he would be the first to have his son cloned. Though he was initially anonymous, a letter he published to the House of Representatives gave enough identifying details to pin him as West Virginia State Legislator Mark Hunt. Mr. Hunt's 10-month-old son had succumbed to a heart defect the previous year. The family blamed and later sued the hospital for malpractice. For his part, Clonaid received $500,000 through another company called Bioserve. That December, Mr. Hunt rented out part of an old high school science lab in Nitro, West Virginia to be used as their lab. This location was kept a secret. In an interview with the New York Times, Dr. Boisselier was candid about the realities of the procedure. Quote, "This baby will have no memory of the 10 months they had been living together. They know the baby will not be exactly the same as the first one, but they are still working to get him back. They think this baby should be alive." Refuting the dangerous potential for human eugenics cloning offered, Rael cited the success of Louise Brown, the first baby brought into the world through in vitro fertilization. On March 28, 2001, Dr. Boisselier and Rael spoke before a congressional panel about cloning. He advocated for the medical potential Clonaid offered, saying it was wrong to stand in the way of science. Rael went on to say the next plan was accelerated growth of clones to facilitate grafting a person's memories onto their clone, allowing for eternal life. Representative James Greenwood stood in disbelief, saying, quote, "Even kooks may have the capacity to make human beings through cloning, and we better get serious about legislating here." The debate went on for some time, but it was clear most politicians opposed human cloning.
There are two things that I know for sure. Number one, there is a God. And number two, I'm not him. The entire debate over human cloning flies in the face of these two great truths.
Rael remained steadfast. Later that year, he gave public speeches for $100,000, though he offered a 90% discount if the audience was all college students. Speaking of college, when rumors spread that Dr. Boisselier had begun research into human cloning, she was blacklisted from academia and forced to resign her position. But this was only the start of her troubles. Dr. Boisselier caught the attention of the FDA, who believed cloning might involve unsanctioned use of medical drugs. Dr. Boisselier contends that they went after phone records to try and find their laboratory, and whatever prospective clients. The truth came out from an unlikely source, the building's caretaker. He had heard about Clonaid on the evening news, and when he put two and two together, he was horrified. Fearing that public backlash could threaten the entire building, he immediately went to the authorities and told them everything he knew. The FDA investigated, but could only find cow eggs. They were willing to keep everything quiet until the court settled the cloning issue, but Dr. Boisselier had other plans. Instead, she went to the media and created a bigger public spectacle around cloning than ever before. In 2002, a journalist put the pieces together and found the location of Clonaid's lab, as well as Mr. Hunt's relationship to the company. That reporter told the locals that the building was at risk for bombing, causing the caretaker to plead with Mr. Hunt to shutter the project. This created a rift between Mr. Hunt and Dr. Boisselier, with the former criticizing Clonaid harshly. Clonaid gave him a full reimbursement and sought out another location outside the United States to build a new lab. Dr. Boisselier had already alluded to other potential sites in previous years, such as a South Korean branch in 1999. She was adamant that Clonaid wouldn't break the law, justifying the move. By this point, harsh legislation banning human cloning in America had passed the House, and President Bush agreed to codify it in law if the Senate concurred. But that caretaker from the building housing the West Virginia lab was skeptical Clonaid was working on cloning at that location, saying he rarely saw Dr. Boisselier or any of the other scientists. In his words, quote, "There was nothing going on in there. I know that for a fact." Still, Clonaid told the media they had more clients, such as a terminally ill man who had the money to attempt cloning. An article in Haaretz Daily outed him as an Israeli businessman who thought his genes deserved another shot. They raised the ethical issue of the wealthy turning to such ventures for vanity's sake, characterizing it as biomegalomania. Rael confirmed that more terminally ill individuals were seeking out this process to keep something of themselves alive. In one case, a dying elderly man supposedly stopped life-saving medication to undergo the experiment. Dr. Boisselier acknowledged that there were other scientists in the world trying to clone humans, but was confident Clonaid could do it first. Mid-year, she told the media Clonaid had several pregnancies of cloned embryos going as far back as February. They were apparently up to 20 pregnancies, though Dr. Boisselier revealed there were some miscarriages. Ever the optimist, Rael touted this as a step towards developing entirely synthetic humans. If true, this would be exactly the progress Clonaid needed to prove itself. Global expansion was reportedly underway in June when a South Korean branch of Clonaid called Biofusion Tech Inc. was established. At a conference in Tokyo, they unveiled an embryonic cell fusion system called the RMX 2010. Immediately, the machine's legitimacy attracted quite a bit of skepticism. In July, Biofusion Tech came under the watch of South Korean investigators after saying that 3 nationals were pregnant with clone embryos. But the company argued that since the procedure happened outside of the country, this amounted to harassment. The ordeal prompted the government to ban the sale of sperm and egg cells, and an immediate review of laws concerning human cloning. Dr. Boisselier continued seeking out suitable locations for a permanent Clonaid lab. Multiple outlets report she was scouting the Ivory Coast around October, as there was ostensibly a high demand in Africa for Clonaid's services. By November, Dr. Boisselier was confident that the first of 5 cloned children would be born within weeks. The Italian scientist Severino Antinori seemed to be the leading competition against Clonaid, announcing his clones would be born in January. Dr. Antinori had helped a 63-year-old woman get pregnant in 1994, giving him some degree of credibility. But towards the end of the year, Dr. Boisselier had made a shocking announcement.
A Florida scientist who believes aliens created life on Earth says she made the world's first human clone.
On December 27, 2002, Dr. Boisselier told the media that the first clone baby was born via cesarean section the previous day at 11:55 a.m. Weighing 7 pounds, baby Eve was apparently the clone of a 31-year-old American woman. Dr. Boisselier gave few details, citing the safety of the child and her parents, but she did say the birth did not take place in America. The couple supposedly sought out Clonaid because the father was infertile. The triumph gave Dr. Boisselier cause to revel at her detractors.
The parents are happy, and I hope that you remember them when you talk about this baby, not like a monster.
No evidence was produced showing the genetic match between mother and daughter, but Dr. Boisselier promised it early in the new year. She reiterated that 4 more clones would be born in January. The American public didn't really know what to think.
It should be just left natural. I don't think that scientists should be interfering with this sort of thing.
Many scientists remained skeptical of both the existence of baby Eve and whether she would remain healthy. To this end, Dr. Boisselier enlisted Dr. Michael Guillen as the supervisor for the tests, an ex-science consultant for ABC News. As days went by without test results being presented, the scientific community's skepticism turned to mockery. Dr. Boisselier insisted, though, that the parents should not be hurried. Still, the baby Eve announcement caught worldwide attention. Before the year was over, Biofusion Tech was raided by South Korean authorities. Their spokesman Kwak Gi-hwa had this to say, quote, The investigators broke through the windows into my house and the offices in Seoul and Daegu to seize documents. He was barred from leaving South Korea, and a woman who signed up as a surrogate was questioned. In America, Clonaid was targeted by a lawyer named Bernard Siegel. Mr. Siegel said he was concerned for baby Eve's welfare, and that Clonaid was exploiting her for scientific purposes. He went on CNN that New Year's Eve to declare that he had filed a motion to have the child taken away by the state. After a few weeks, Dr. Guillain was frustrated he hadn't seen baby Eve yet. Resigning from the verification committee, he felt he and everyone in the media may have been had. But he was hopeful this wasn't the case, and he said he would be ready to go again if Clonaid produced the child. Clonaid said they were stalling because of the looming legal problems with Mr. Siegel. Dr. Boisselier was concerned the lawyer could have the girl separated from her parents. This was contingent, though, on the child being in Florida, where the announcement was made. If not, they wouldn't have jurisdiction over the child or her parents. Amid this, Dr. Boisselier announced that a second clone had been born to a Dutch lesbian couple. Towards the end of the month, Bernard Siegel's petition was moving along, and the vice president of Clonaid was called to testify in front of a judge. He didn't answer most of the questions, leading him to almost be held in contempt of court. Rael appeared on Connie Chung Tonight to debate Mr. Siegel. Before the program, he asked Mrs. Chung to refer to him as His Holiness, to which she complied. He said he didn't know anything about baby Eve, or that Clonaid had even been successful. Not until Dr. Boisselier announced it to the media, that is. He was, however, denied entry into South Korea because of his Clonaid association, which he said he would appeal. In court, Dr. Boisselier said that baby Eve and her family were located in Israel, out of reach of Florida's authorities. The ordeal moved her to declare that she would have no further contact with baby Eve's family, in the interest of their safety. Of course, this wouldn't keep Clonaid off the airwaves and out of the headlines. Clonaid Vice President Thomas Kanzig appeared on the John Walsh Show with some Raelians to promote and defend their work. Dr. Boisselier continued to hype the progress they were making, promising the next step was to develop an artificial womb called the Babytron. Excitement spread through Realism, and for her hard work, Dr. Boisselier was chosen by Rael as his future successor. Rael didn't seem to mind if Clonaid was in fact a sham, because it boosted the profile of the religion beyond anything that came before. When meeting a group of Raelians around this time, the sociologist Susan Palmer recounts an interesting truth. Clonaid was in fact not registered as a company, and instead defined ambiguously as a project. They let it slip that there was indeed a company behind the effort, but its true identity would have to be kept a secret. The website more or less repeats this. This same group also hinted that Dr. Antonori had kept quiet about cloning from there after seeing the legal backlash Clonaid had faced. In March, Clonaid published a photo allegedly showing the third child born in Japan. It's interesting to note that reverse image searching this points to it being a stock photo for clone babies. Clonaid also noted that the parents were building a case to defend cloning for when they went public, through a Human Clone Rights Foundation. But the Boston Globe confirmed what the Raelians had said. Unsealed court documents showed that there were only 2 employees, no board of directors, and no fixed address for Clonaid. Dr. Boisselier didn't refute this, saying everything was out of country to avoid government scrutiny. In a June interview with CBS, Dr. Boisselier admitted that Clonaid was undergoing federal investigation for what it claimed to offer. Still, she wouldn't say that Clonaid was a con job. Now she was saying there was a branch being established in Brazil on an undisclosed island. In 2004, Clonaid was still talking of the many clones it claimed to have produced by now. The latest clones were said to be Australian, Brazilian, and South African, amongst other nationalities. Once more, Dr. Boisselier refused to name names. By now, Clonaid said at least 13 clones existed from countries all over the world. At this stage, the scientific community pretty much considered Clonaid either a money-making hoax or as a means of getting Realism into the media. Then, in a move few saw coming, Clonaid went quiet around mid-2004. Clonaid remained mostly inactive, aside from occasionally updating their website. Yet cloning remained a hot topic. In South Korea, a distinguished researcher named Dr. Hwang Woo-suk claimed to run cloning experiments through 2004 and 2005. When he was scrutinized, Dr. Boisselier took special notice and blamed his persecution on religious powers. In early 2006, she offered him a job with Clonaid. It doesn't appear he ever followed up on this. On December 26, 2008, 6 years after the supposed birth of baby Eve, Clonaid announced they would offer a discount for anybody who wanted to go public with their cloning procedure. Dr. Boisselier commented that the process had been refined significantly over the years, and that up to 70% of it would be used in the development of a sister company, Clonaid. There didn't seem to be any willing participants to her offer, though. When Michael Jackson died in 2009, the Clonaid website updated in response to inquiries about cloning him. Dr. Boisselier refused to confirm or deny it, citing Clonaid's strict privacy policy and a desire to protect any celebrities who might be interested. This association may seem random, but Michael was named a Raelian honorary guide in 1992 for his global peacemaking efforts. Dr. Boisselier paid tribute to his past interest in Realism. Quote, "Michael was a visionary who wasn't afraid to embrace new technologies. I'm glad his interest in cloning is being revealed now, since he was a pioneer in his views about it back in 2002, and his fans ought to know about it." A Raelian press release stated the Elohim had probably already cloned Michael Jackson themselves. Because the story was mostly reported on by tabloids, it didn't get much traction. It seemed the public fascination with anything related to Clonaid had subsided. During the mid-2000s, when Clonaid went dormant, Dr. Boisselier had been busy researching stem cells. In the 2010s, it appeared Clonaid would be its successor, with the website claiming extravagant treatments in a similar vein. The website seemed to be advertising cell engineering and brain rejuvenation as well. Ultimately, though, the project has mostly flown under the radar since its creation. Nevertheless, Clonaid still exists and offers these treatments, but their presentation is far more professional. Dr. Boisselier remarried to a fellow Raelian, changing her name to Bridget Rohr. She also began a new initiative to reverse the effects of female genital mutilation. They appeared at the Avian Expo in 2007, raising about $3,000 towards building a hospital in Burkina Faso. Rael had learnt of the procedure they would use back in France. Leading surgeon Dr. Marcy Bowers was recruited for the effort, traveling overseas to meet with African women who wanted to try the operation. By 2014, the hospital in Burkina Faso was built, but the government wouldn't let it open, which Dr. Boisselier claimed was due to the influence of the Catholic Church. Several trials run by Dr. Bowers were in fact successes, and she continues to work as a volunteer doctor for the organization. In 2015, a former doctor from Clonaid wrote a letter to the Raelian Wise Council. He decried Dr. Boisselier's cloning methods from over a decade ago, calling her a fraud and accusing her of multiple transgressions against Rael. This included promoting pseudoscience, lying to the structure, and insulting the Elohim. In an 18-page document, he charged Dr. Boisselier with coercing him to lie about the birth of baby Eve, who he says never existed. He felt these lies were harming the image of the religion, and urged his leader to divest from any involvement in Clonaid. In response to these allegations, Rael supposedly excommunicated him, and maintained there was no truth to the letter. Still, many ex-Raelians remain suspicious of whatever went on in 2002. Although the website still exists, Clonaid is mostly inert as of 2020. Bridget Boisselier remains an active Raelian, going by the name Bridget Hanley. She's teamed up with her daughter Marina to focus on Clonaid, which keeps an active Facebook page and is still taking clients. Reviews on their services are mixed. Nowadays, Clonaid is mostly a memory of that interesting period around the turn of the millennium when it seemed the future had arrived. Clonaid briefly came back into the public consciousness when 32-year-old rapper Kid Buu claimed he was a Clonaid baby, though given his age, this simply wouldn't add up. Kid Buu also said he had once been brainwashed. Most chalk this up to his rapper gimmick based on a Dragon Ball Z villain. Fans will probably know it was actually the character Cell associated with genetic splicing, not Buu. Rael and his followers have a modest presence nowadays, but they still seem hopeful that technology will one day allow them to live out their dreams. It doesn't seem like we'll ever get the full story on Clonaid, but new details still trickle out as the years go on. Some believe it was a major publicity stunt, but others remain more sympathetic to Bridget Boisselier, characterizing her as an idealistic mind who may have gotten in over her head. Given the debate that rages on even today about the ethics of human cloning, public research is stalled. Perhaps one day public attitudes will in fact shift, as Rael said happened with Louise Brown. For now, though, the idea of cloning will simply have to remain an interesting what if.